Um, so my name is Frank Aba-Onu, and currently, right now, I'm an in-house attorney at a company called Prime Therapeutics. Prior to that, I used to work at a law firm doing civil litigation, and then prior to that, I used to be at the Minnesota Attorney General's office. But well, one of the main reasons why I think you have me here is that I'm also the president of the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit? What brought on the creation of that association and how is being the president of that, what is that like?
Sure. I mean, that's a long story, so I'll try to truncate it a little bit. But I would say back in the day, probably 30 plus years ago, there weren't many, and still aren't, but there weren't many minority lawyers in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. So the minority bar, so to speak, they came together and created one association for the minority attorneys so that they could have a voice. That quickly spun off into various different organizations. So about 20 odd so years ago, our founders created the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers so they can help promote Black attorneys, judges, and law students, but also, which I think is equally important, to be a voice for the Black Minnesotans and to be sort of a champion for racial equity. So for myself, this year I'm the president. I've also served on the board as the vice president and treasurer. But our goal is to work within our legal community, to help promote our attorneys, help promote our judges, help the pipeline for the law students, but also seek and see what issues are in the community so that we can help our Black Minnesotans have a voice, stay heard, and make sure that we're promoting racial and social justice issues.
Yeah, and thank you for all that. That was one of my questions originally was like, when did it get formed? Because it had to have been sort of recent, as you sort of touched on, and there really isn't that many people that are not white in a lot of that industry in general. And even I'm going to bring a sort of total side topic. Yesterday, there was a teacher, a high school teacher, who locked themselves to the fence of the government center downtown Minneapolis. She brought up specifically that there's only 4% of teachers in Minnesota that are not white. And so that's just this sort of bringing into the industry of, jobs, commerce, lawyers, everything in the workforce in Minnesota is very sort of whittled down and can you talk about just real quick how many do you know if of the numbers? How many black lawyers, specifically black attorneys, are there here in Minneapolis or Twin Cities in general, or Minnesota in general, if you know?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact numbers right now, but I know that the population of actual Minnesotans, so Black Minnesotans versus what percent of them are represented in the legal community is lower. Right, in our membership though, it kind of fluctuates. We kind of have over 100 to 120 to 130 individuals who are part of our organization. But the problem is, when you say Black lawyers and Black Minnesotans, Hispanic, Latinx, put together, Native American, Asian, you know, categorically, like you said, in Minnesota, and it's nationally, but Minnesota suffers from this more than many other states. The numbers of those individuals who are what you call BIPOC are lower in our profession. And when you go a step further, the numbers of those individuals who are, let's say, in a civil, so you talk about civil practice partners, or even government like the Attorney General's office, or even Hennepin County, those in leadership positions are lower for minorities than they are for not. So it's not equal representation in those spaces, but also when you're in those spaces, those individuals who have the managerial, powers and abilities, it's not equal representation there as well too.
Mm. Yeah, you touched on some good points, and to bring that to the Derek Chauvin trial, which we have going on, one of the most historic trials that we've been witness to in our lifetime. There's actually two sitting attorneys on the state side that are black, and so that actually like stuck out to me. Keith Ellison obviously is the Attorney General. Then you have Jerry Blackwell, and so. Just in that realm, talking about the representation and the underrepresentation, and also the other side of that racial disparity is the way that the authorities and yeah, the authorities in general have reacted towards what you would call BIPOC or Black people specifically, Black and Indigenous are specifically really, really targeted in Minneapolis and St. Paul area for a huge bias towards those types of those communities of folks who are of Black descent, African descent, of Indigenous descent. And what's happened is we see a mass incarceration and all these things, which we just got from Keith, who was talking about that in this previous interview. And so I want to bring that in real quick too. In your profession, do you do mostly criminal or civil cases? And if on the criminal side, is that something you really see a huge disparity of, as people have been talking about it as such?
Yeah, so unfortunately, my practice goes towards the civil side with civil cases.
Okay. Hmm.
But in either case, I think for us, I'm touch on two things you mentioned. The first thing being the when you said looking at the prosecution, there are you got General Keith Ellison, Attorney General, and then you've got Jerry Blackwell, and I think when Keith took this case, he basically said we're going to use all our resources to make sure that justice is served, and by doing that, he's I think Keith was wise because he basically said, I'm going to seek those in the community who can help us in this case. Because Jerry Blackwell, people will say this, especially if they're pushing the defense's agenda, will say he's not a criminal attorney. Like myself,
Hmm.
Jerry's a civil
Hmm.
attorney, but Jerry's a masterful trial attorney. Nobody can ever say that he's not. And seeing this opening statement and see him in the direct questioning of some of the powerful witnesses today, you can see why Jerry is sought after. So bringing him to the team because of what he brings in his skill set was a very smart decision. And also, like you said, bringing in a diverse team to show that we're bringing people who have different voices to show the support for the community, but also show that we're going to use all the resources to make sure justice is done.
And thank you for bringing that up too, which I'm so glad you did, because when it comes to the Derek Chauvin trial, he's facing three charges. I want to get into those a little bit later, but I wanted to bring up the opening statements that you just touched on, which Jerry Blackwell presented, and the opening statements for the state side, the prosecution side, and then the defense side was Eric Nelson. Blackwell took 58 minutes, and it was a very long. But it went sort of quickly in the fact that he was presenting a lot of facts, a lot of a lot of situational awareness of the situation as well, and he brought up a new number, the 929, and that was more time than people have been talking about with 846, or the less than 9 minutes, or and so it was a specific thing. Can you just talk about this masterful approach that you saw? What did you see in that?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. You said it went a long time, and I was telling my wife, I thought the openings were going to go longer, just because
Hmm.
that's what we do, right? And you want to get the information out there. But I think both sides truncated theirs, knowing that didn't want to lose the jury, right? And I think what Jerry did that was really well done was, like you said, it was 59 minutes, and that's a long time, period, right? For anyone to sit there and watch this. And he brought in mixed media to help it, right? He used the charts, he used the graph, kind of painting the 9 minutes and 29 seconds and dissecting it. And he used that very well. Jerry also has a calm demeanor. He was passionate without yelling, without shouting. You could feel it in what he was saying. He also uses what we call getting the hook, right? You got to hook someone, right? So kind of talked about Derek Chauvin, using words and phrases to get you to understand that, he had his knee on Mr. Floyd. He didn't lay down. He stayed there. But also the video, playing the video in its entirety, and then coming back and talking why that's important and why we're going to show you these things was powerful. So I think the fact that he made the 59 minutes seem shorter, the fact that he used all the resources they had, the videos, the announcing who's going to come when, and so far, one of the things that people don't like about what lawyers do is they preview something, but they change what they're going to do. And so far, the prosecution has previewed it, and exactly what they previewed, they're laying out bit by bit by bit. And we'll see as the weeks unfold if they continue to do that. So I thought that was was a really good job. And on the other side, I will say it's hard. I think they did a good job by keeping it short. The one thing I will say, and I want to say this at the outset, so that people understand, right? Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers, a black man was killed. And people are going to say, well, you have a bias, you have an angle. We have a bias for racial equity, right? We have a bias for social justice. And for me, I believe that in this case, for Derek Chauvin, the process should be followed, right? Whether or not I agree with his defense and how they do that, that's what we're going to be talking about, and that's what we're going to continuously bring out. But the process should be followed. But we think the process should be transparent, and we think the process should be fair. And then we think justice should ultimately come about from that. So, that's why, we're very fervent in what we say and how we say it, not because, we have a bias for one person or the other. We have a bias for racial equity and social justice.
Yeah. Well, thank you for talking about even both sides. Eric Nelson's, as you said, was 24 minutes or something like that, less than 30 minutes. I did hear some people sort of in the community talking about how sort of cold he was with his approach. I don't know how typical it is. I haven't watched many trials, but they were talking about the coldness in the fact that he never really once mentioned like a person lost their life, respect to George, which you just brought up was a black man, and it was like very emotional for a lot of people throughout the world watching his death virally. A lot of people have called it a modern day lynching on video, and so when we look at some of those dynamics, and then we have Eric Nelson, who's representing Chauvin, who actually doesn't talk about that. Is that a normal thing? I just wanted to ask. It doesn't seem like they would need to talk about it, but would that be normal in a murder trial like this?
I always want to make sure I'm staying within my wheelhouse. So,
Right,
I've
right.
talked to some
Civil.
of, my colleagues about it and things like that. And I will say, they're obviously they're trying to paint their own picture and trying to distance themselves from that. And like you said, a lot of people see that as disrespect, given what happened in this circumstance, right? A man was murdered, right? And for what they're trying to do, they're trying to change the dynamic, change the scope. I will say though that, you know it's a hard sell. And remember, like what I said, right? Bias towards racial justice, racial equity. Here we had Eric Nelson who mentioned, that Mr. Chauvin did everything correctly, right? And he's going to try and present contradictory evidence to kind of show that. But there are a couple of things he said that I think kind of just make you just look and say, okay, we can't go this route, right? It seemed like he tried to blame the crowd for a lot of what happened. And I love what Jerry said, right? Use your eyes, trust your eyes, right? Because even looking at those video, you go, okay, there's 10 to 12 people. This is not a crowd of like rampaging mob who are trying to like get at him or do something. And if that is the case, that there's this people and they're yelling at you, does that mean you continue to put your knee on someone who's not responsive for 9 minutes and 29 seconds? So there's just, I don't know how much of that is going to really resonate with people. Like you said, some people are not happy with not recognizing the fact that, this man was murdered. But also, as you can see with these witnesses, I think that each one who has testified, whether they were, a child at the time or an adult, they've all been powerful in their own way. And for them to kind of say that, oh, the crowd played a part in this, it doesn't really work because of how they've testified and what they've said.
Yeah, and we heard some of that leading even today with some of the testimony, some of the questioning by Eric Nelson, even asking the latest the firefighter Genevieve, what did you say the crowd was heavy? You said this in your
Right.
transcript, and then he took the opportunity to bring the transcript to her after she said she didn't want to see it multiple times. That was interesting too. It seems like yeah, they're definitely. Putting it not on Chauvin, and that's as a defense attorney would want to do. Do you think the testimony that the state has brought forward with a lot of these witnesses has been really compelling to a lot of people? And they brought forward Darnella, who had the viral video. Even this latest, the firefighter Genevieve, she had a video. The
Yeah.
person Alicia, I think before that, she had a video. These are
Mhm.
all people rooted like right there in the community. And then they had Donald Williams as well, and the miners that saw it. So they've started this with all of the witnesses so far that we've seen have seen specifically what's happening. What is your take on the first 2 days of questioning?
I think it's been good. I think their goal is just they want to set the stage, right? To show you, to get everyone to feel what happened before they go into, they're going to have their experts, right? Use of force expert was, and talk
Mhm.
about their medical experts. But before they get you there, they want everyone to be in the same playing field as those who witnessed this. And typically, sometimes, you go and say, all right, we have videos, we have these witnesses. These are the ones we want to call. But I think their strategy, and obviously I do not know, but I think their strategy is based on the defense, kind of saying there was a crowd, it was heavy, they were in their face. It's just to say, well, okay, these are the people who were there. Like you said, some of them were, I think that one of them was 9 going on 10. The other one was, so it's like you're saying, this is the crowd. This is, these are the people. So I think they're making a point to show you, like Jerry said, a bouquet of humanity, right? You've got people as young as 9 going to close to 40. You got those with Genevieve who has actual experience and expertise in this. Also, Mr. Williams, who also has a different set of expertise and experience. So I think it's just, and one thing which is, you don't usually see with witnesses, especially when you bring witness for a prosecution, or like you're bringing someone there who's not necessarily part of your team. You might get a lot, and I mean a lot of inconsistencies. And these witnesses have been really, they've all said the same thing because they felt the
Mm.
same way. There's been little things there and there, like, oh, I said it was heavy, or I think, Chauvin had his hand in his pocket instead of his hand in his thigh. But those are little things. But all in all, they're all saying the same or similar things. And they're also, they're getting, like you said, these videos in. And that's something the jurors, these videos, right? The video tells the tale, and then the individuals are humanizing the tale.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And you brought up the 9-year-old, and that was it's hard to listen to those things for a lot of people. It's very emotional to hear other people's emotions, and a lot of these folks that witnessed it, they've said they feel so bad now. They think about it every night. I think Darnella was saying she thinks she's apologizes to George every night when she goes to sleep, and saw her father and her uncle and her brother as another black man. And so like yeah, to even hear that. So you as a black man, how does that make you feel? But then secondly, looking on like the whole, what do you think that this is like? This is impacting the mentality of people, you know?
Yeah, no, I think it's, I'm going, I liked his openings. I'm going to his words again. I think it's what Jerry said. It's bringing a bouquet of humanity, right? It's giving.
Hmm.
There's one thing, and each of us feel it when we see that video, and especially in the opening, seeing the entirety. I've never seen the entirety of the whole thing, and seeing that put there. But then having folks like Darnell and others humanizing it and giving you their feelings. I mean, when she said that, I I felt like I need to apologize. Just, I mean, it's just so it's heavy on your heart and soul. Even I think there was one thing that we were I was very upset about. The defense were trying to paint Mr. Williams as an angry black man, right? And it's like, just because he spoke up and because he's black and he's big, he's an angry black man. And I think that's, again, dehumanizing the individual. But I like his response, kind of saying, especially when they play the recording of him saying, "I'm calling the police on the police. They're killing this man in front of us," right? So, to answer your question, how does that make me feel as a black person? It makes me feel proud of the people on the stand, and in their courage to be there and speak their heart and their feelings. It makes me sad that this happened, and the fact that without the recording, we wouldn't have been in the same position as we are now. And the only reason that's the case is because it was a black man, right? Instead of it being a white man in a different neighborhood. So to me, it's a catch 22. But this is the chance, right? We had to, and everyone's coming to realization of that. Watch a black man be murdered in front of our eyes, and we saw the protests and we saw how people expressed their feelings. And now, luckily, we are being able to see justice unfold and hopefully the transparency of that as it goes through. So I think this is a good and beautiful process for us as a country, but it's sad that we're here. We're gonna hopefully move forward from this.
It's sort of what you're touching on too is like sort of what the jury questioning, sort of what I felt from the jury questioning. The jury questioning was a lot of people who were early 30s, younger people, 40s, 20s, and they were all, I shouldn't say it's all, a large majority of them had different thoughts on policing, and those different thoughts were more geared towards trying to have some reform or trying to have some differences in how the police are held accountable. And so it seems like what you're saying, the bouquet of humanity. And I just want to touch on real quick. Many community members is they're calling Darnella, everybody else, heroes, and even after them touching the stand, even more so. And so that's just I'm glad you brought that up too, because that's one of the main things where if it wasn't for them, would we have would this have happened to possibly bring forward what you I think we're alluding to, which is this possible change. And so when I'm gonna bring it back to the jury selection real quick, because there is 14 sat jurors, and the jurors are who's going to decide the fate of this trial. And basically, they're actually really sort of diverse on Minnesota's lens. It's like 8 women, I think, 6 men, a couple African men, I believe, and a black man, a Latino man, and I'm missing a whole bunch of people, but also a bunch of white people. And so I bring that up because there was all this questioning, and a lot of this questioning within the jury selection was geared towards social differences, social change, racial biases, and also Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. And so we had this whole dichotomy of social issues that were brought to us with people just getting questioned in the jury selection. What is your interpretation of what happened during that 2 like tumultuous weeks of like, whoa? What was your interpretation of that?
This the cynic in me is just this is fodder for the defense or whoever it may be to sort of string people out for quote unquote biases and issues that they might have. But the I guess the optimist in me kind of sees this as um, because there were a lot of people who expressed a lot of different viewpoints that you don't imagine to see in Minnesota, especially when it relates to Black Lives Matter, relates to policing, and just it gives you an understanding of what people are feeling and how they're feeling. But obviously, those questions, are geared in order for whether it's a prosecution or defense to earmark who do we not want in our jury.
Mhm.
Because voir dire, what you do in that situation is you can't pick a perfect jury. That's how it works, and the goal is to strike some people that you think would just not be the person to help you get your outcome. So, I love the fact that those questions were there, but they're there to gear towards that outcome. And I couldn't watch all the questioning, but for the parts that I did, like you said, I did like it because there was a cross section of people, different ages, sexes, races, who sort of, in my mind, got where we are, right? I mean, did they have solutions? No, but they seem to be thinking, about these things a lot and very critically. And I think that's positive for where we're going as Minnesotans and as, the nation as well, too. So I'm hoping that it's positive, but I definitely did see that, though, that process is just more of we need to X people we don't want, but hopefully positive.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the positive out of it is what you had alluded to at the end of the people are geared towards possibly changing things. And I think that that's where, that's what I saw in general. I was very surprised, and maybe I heard that from you as well. I was very surprised, but I also wasn't surprised in the sense that what George Floyd's death has happened, that's changed everything. It's impacted so many people. And but to bring it back to this trial real quick, or to the witnesses, to Donald Williams, we heard, and you brought about they were trying to paint him as an angry black man or just an angry man. I think what they were talking about, even in general, when it comes to him voicing everything that he saw, was almost one of the biggest narrative pieces um, to having that 9 minute viral video be the keystone video. And so, yeah, I just wanted to, what is your interpretation of the Donald Williams testimony and questioning?
Yeah, no, I mean, Don Williams is a unique individual. He seemed to be comfortable in his skin. He's an individual who's proud of what he's done. So it's hard to have someone at the stand like that because he wants to talk about that. But what
Mm,
he did do that was positive in so many ways was that he talked about how his experience shaped everything leading up to that moment, right? You got the mixed martial arts experience, the wrestling, everything he's done as far as his businesses, also bouncing and working with the police in other circumstances, leading him to that moment where he's walking in and bless his soul, man, he's got his sandals and socks on, just like chilling, walking to that moment. Also, right? And he sees this and all that training that he's had, all those experiences accumulate into that one moment where he sees this one man in a position where he knows this is not good. And like he said to the the operator, dispatcher, I think that the police are killing this man, right? So I think that was powerful, and I think Eric Nelson knew that was powerful. And with a witness like that, you're just trying to poke holes in their testimony, make them less believable,
mm,
make them less welcoming to the jury. And so his theme again was the crowd was getting in their face. He was yelling. Obviously, Mr. Williams was one of the gentlemen who was cursing at the police, calling them names, saying some things, and he wanted to push it and say, this person wasn't helping. He's angry. He's black. All those things without saying it. And like you said, it's without saying, but they're trying to put that impression in people's minds. And I think the prosecution, did a decent job in coming back and saying, why were you upset? Right? And he's like, because they're killing this man in front of me. I mean, who who in their right mind would not be upset? I think that's the question you need to ask. But the problem is what the defense is doing is they're playing on our prejudice. They're playing on how we feel for certain individuals. Williams you could see it right in a suit. He's big. He's done mixed martial arts. He's threatening, and they wanted to say he's a threatening
mm.
black. I mean, there's no other way of saying that, right? And that's what they tried to do. And, for our purposes and thinking about this is like, we understand that you deserve a fair trial, but you don't deserve to go and play on people's prejudices in order to trick people into believing a certain way. So that was my impression from the defense. But even with that, saying that, I think Mr. Williams held up well. He showed all ranges of emotion from laughing to crying to being kind of like, what's going on? Just being human. And that's what you want from your witnesses. You want them to be human. You want them to answer truthfully. At the end of the day, I felt he was believable. I felt he was truthful, and I felt he spoke his piece.
Word, yeah, thank you for that. I know it's a lot to get to, and I wanna bring it to like maybe two more questions if you have the time. Do you got the time for that?
Sure.
All right, sweet. Thanks. And so we also heard from a 911 dispatcher, and she said a lot of things earlier as well. And you had brought up Donald Williams had called the police on the police. She was sort of calling the police on the police. She said she didn't want to call me a snitch or call me whatever.
Yeah.
I need to tell you this. There was also the firefighter who Genevieve who called the police on the police. I feel like there was another one maybe too. But so the 911 dispatcher, the snitching, that whole power structure, we sort of talked to, I don't know if you were able to hear any of the interview that was
I
happening
did. I did.
before. Okay, yeah. So that's so Keith McCarron, he's been working for the city for a long time. So within that whole conversation of things, what is your interpretation of um, her testimony? And also, I wanted to ask you, do you think she would be safe, knowing what you know in these situations? And also, she seems like a woman of color. And it seems like, would that also play a part in further retribution acts, possibly by the people that she employs her?
I I think that she was a perfect witness to go first, right? She was a dispatcher, so she laid down the whole timeline for everyone. They needed to get key evidence in so they can use it with everyone else, and she did that. But I had a friend ask me like, why did they bring her up first? And as you get to the end of that testimony, that's where it really matters because, like you said, she quote unquote snitched, right? But I think the key part is when she says, she goes, "That's not my job, right? My job is not to call the lieutenant to ask him about use of force and if it's working, right?" I saw that, and I'm just going, I don't I don't know what's going on. And I think at one point she said, I thought the video had frozen because they were just in the same position on that man. She goes on that man for who knows how long. And that is telling, right? She's like, I thought if this couldn't be possible. So the fact that this is not part of her job, but yet she felt so compelled to do it speaks volumes. Even like you said earlier on, she's not an expert in that, but we can trust our eyes, right? And that's, we can trust our senses and we can trust when we see something and we don't think is right. Whether or not she feels safe, I honestly can't speak to that. But I will say, I think, Jerry and the prosecution made a really good point of saying this is not a complete indictment on the police department. Though I would be one of the first to say that we need to revisit how we do policing, right? But it's not an indictment of the police department. We have many fine police officers, many fine administrative staff who work with them. And Chief Ardento, he's going to be one of the key witnesses. And he's going to be speaking about what's proper procedure. And he's someone who, based on his public persona, the statements he's put out, and what he's done in his time here, that people have faith in him. He's winning back the community support and faith. So the long way of answering this is, I hope and I think based on what the community is saying, what other officers are saying, and and what sort of the prosecution is saying, that people are going to be supportive of her, and that there's not going to be retaliation to that. I can't speak to that because I don't have enough experience within that system to know, but I'm hoping based on what we've seen that they would be. But regardless of that, it takes extremely a lot of bravery to do what she did then and to continue to do what she did now. So I give her a lot of props for that.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's I do too as a person. That's a very good point. And you sort of bring up the last point that I wanted to make. The next few weeks, 3, 4, 5, 2, who knows how long it's going to take. There's a whole litmus test of there's like a few hundred witnesses. They're not going to call them all. Um, but some of these witnesses have also, like as you said, we got Chief Arredondo coming up. Um, we have a bunch of witness experts who are like the autopsy people. Dr. Baker, I think, is coming up. There's a quite a few, just a huge list. And there's also other victims of Derek Chauvin. And Derek Chauvin has also killed Wayne Reyes, an indigenous man, in 2006, I believe. Chauvin's been on the force for a long time, about 20 years, and nearly 20 years. And so when we're talking about Chauvin, this case, the next few people, there is, like I said, people who have been hurt by Chauvin in the past and even had their knees on knee on the neck of, had their knee, had Chauvin's knee on the neck of them. And so, what do you expect to have happen? And then we have the defense that's going to call whatever. I'm not sure who they're going to call, but they're going to call. I didn't. I guess I missed it in the opening statements if they did say they're specifically calling somebody. But um, what is your interpretation of these next couple of weeks? What are we looking forward to? What are we? What should we keep our eye on as well?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think right now it's basically starting out to get us to get straight with what we call the causation, right? They want to get everyone in the room where it happened, right? So they want all the witnesses who saw what happened, so we can understand how this happened, paint the picture, get us all there. After that, it's a horse of pieces to know what's going to happen, but I think it's definitely going to be, like you said, we got our experts, so we got a use of force. How much force is necessary to use in that circumstance, and why did Chauvin's knee on the neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds? Why was that excessive? To me, again, use our eyes. We can see that it is, but you need the experts to show that. So we're going to have cadre of experts showing that. And we're also going to have, like you said, we're going to have the examiners. We're going to have both the one that did it for the city and also the one that did the independent exam. We're probably going to have them testify. Then we're going to have our experts explain what that means. And we're going to have our experts explain away, which I think is very important because the big piece of defense is saying Mr. Floyd had drugs in his system and that causes death. So the state's experts are going to clearly explain why, based on even the findings of the examiner, basically saying that this was homicide, right? So they're going to explain why the circumstances were the way they were and explain to us, why Derek Chauvin's knee on the neck was the cause. The defense, it's really up in the air what they choose to do, right? Mr. Chauvin doesn't have to testify. Question is, will he? You never know. But they're definitely going to parade their experts, right? Their use of force expert to kind of say, this is why, Mr. Chauvin did what he did and why it was reasonable. And then they will probably have their medical experts too. So, they're going to do that. And whether or not they have other, character witnesses or bring other people, that's really up in the air. I mean, I think based on what we're seeing now, I think his opening was short. Maybe you think that their case is going to be short and to the point, but you just never know.
Mm. Yeah, thanks for that rundown. That's a lot to think about. Actually, one more question that I do have that I wanted to touch on. I brought up a protest that are happening downtown. There's been a couple that have happened since the Chauvin trial, and there's also somebody that's chained themselves to the fence, as I brought up, a teacher, and she's looking for police accountability, and she has demands, and she's down there right now. You as a lawyer, part of Minnesota Association for Black Lawyers, would you all have anything to say in terms of protesters when it comes to their rights for the protesters to be out? I know right now, real quick, I'll touch on CUAPB, and I think ACLU have brought up maybe a lawsuit or some kind of letter to the Hennepin County government center, or the Hennepin County government, for all the fencing and that sort of that restriction of the First Amendment. But would you have
Mm-hmm.
anything to mention when it comes to some of the protesters' rights, or just the rights of people in general when it comes to the situation around the trial? If there's the chance that he doesn't get convicted, or if he's convicted of a lesser charge that people like, and people
Yeah.
are out there protesting, what should people look out for? What should they be aware of? Anything like
Yeah.
that you would want to drop to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important thing to know. I mean, like the first thing I would say is be safe and know your rights. It's important to know what you can or can't do, but it's also as much as it's people like what if they're not doing something right? It's important comply with what the officers say. That can always get you in trouble when you don't, because if you don't, they use that against you whatever they want to do. So know your rights. Um, there are a couple of organizations that are out there helping protesters, helping people, and training people and watchers and things like that. The National Lawyers Guild, they're an organization that helps, especially if people get in jail and need to find a lawyer. The Legal Rights Center here in Minnesota, in Hennepin County, they they provide criminal defense for those in Hennepin County, so that will include the courthouse area. You've got the neighborhood justice center, Minnesota Freedom Fund. Just the Freedom Fund helps with bail issues for people. But right now, because it's a heightened area, right? Like you mentioned, they've got the fencing, they've got the National Guard, they've got those officers there. It's a little bit different about where you can protest, but typically you can protest. You've got a public area as long as you're not interfering with a legitimate, police business or interfering with traffic and things like that. You can protest on the sidewalks, on the grass by the area. I saw in the video that was airing before we got on that there were people in that grass area, right? You can protest there, but if the officers have a legitimate reason to tell you to disperse, they got to give you warning. They got to tell you what that reason is. Videotape, you can audio, video record as long as it's something in plain sight and you're not interfering with police business. They can't take that away from you without a search warrant. Um, um, and if they ask for your recording, ask you to stop, unless they give you a legitimate reason, they can't. And then if they ever they have you and they are asking you questions, this is one thing you always got to keep in mind. You need to tell them your name, and date of birth, and just basic things like that. But always ask, officer, am I under arrest? And if they say no, walk away. Situations like that, you can never win, so you walk away. But if you can't, always try to remember as much as possible. Write down anything so you can get all the information accurate. But if you're ever in a situation where you are getting arrested, and the safest bet is to say, I'm not going to talk without my lawyer. But the first thing you do if they're questioning you, just ask them, "Am I under arrest?" If you're not, feel safe to walk away. But know your rights though, because there are a lot of things you can do, but oftentimes things get very heated and very crazy in these circumstances. But you want to make sure that you're being safe, that you're following the rules, because if you're doing those things, later on you can at least use them to help you in those circumstances.
Yeah, thanks for dropping those resources there too. I think that people could utilize that and some good know your rights
For
sort of
sure.
trainings that are coming along through those resources as well. So yeah, if there's anything else we missed, you want to touch on, definitely bring that up. And also, can you tell people where to either find your work or more about the Minnesota Association for Black Lawyers?
Yeah, and I appreciate you having me. We're, like I said, it's Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers, so it's mabl.org. That's mabl.org. If people want to reach out to us as an organization, feel free to do so. It's board@mabl.org, so it's board@mabl.org. Like I said, our goal is to help one, Black judges, lawyers, and law students, but we're also here to help Black Minnesotans and also with an eye towards racial equity and social justice.